All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our virtual discussion with author Aigner Loren Wilson's short story collection, Plagued Company and Other Stories, and her poetry collection, To Be Haunted, on this very spooky Friday right before Halloween. Thank you for celebrating with us. We have Aigner here today to talk about her book with us and her books, her collections, and I'll put the link in the chat box to our event where if you scroll down, you can order copies of her work. I would highly suggest it. So with that, I will add that to the chat right now. Thank you for bearing with the technology. All right. So I am happy to introduce Aigner Loren Wilson as a queer Black speculative fiction, poetry, game, and nonfiction writer whose work visits themes of family, love, and friendship. She is an associate editor and copy editor for Strange Horizons and the horror podcast Nightlight. She also served as a guest editor for Fireside Magazine's Winter 2022 issues and Apparition Literary's July 2021 Contamination Special Issue. Aigner writes regularly for Tor.com, for Tor Nightfire, and Discover Pods. Her work has appeared or is forthcoming in Lightspeed Magazine, Wired, Thea, and many more. To check out her books, games, and courses, visit her website, and I will put that in the chat as well. And just a friendly reminder, as we begin to listen, please keep those mics muted so we can give Aigner all our attention. And Aigner, I give the floor to you to start from Plagued Company and Other Stories. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks everyone for coming. This is awesome. Thanks. So yeah, I am going to read a short story from Plagued Company, my speculative fiction short story collection. And the story that I'm going to read is Bang Bang, which is a part of a serialized set of short stories surrounding two friends who recently broke up and get sucked into an old school horror survival game. And it's about how they work together to make it through. And this is number 2 in the series. The first one has been made into an audio drama series by the Ghostlight Theater. And that link can be found at my website. Yeah, and here's Bang Bang. How do you exorcise someone from a video game? Marvel's Madness Curse. Help, my friend got sucked into a video game. Dee wasn't sure if he would use any of the tips and tricks he found on the web. For now, it was good to have Mark in the game, where Dee could go and see him or not see him, like he had been doing for the past couple of weeks. It was the first time in over a month the two of them hadn't spent the midnight hours lost in some dark fictional or fictionalized world. The space and time did Dee wonders. He was able to sleep through the night without waking up from a dream of Mark or waking up to reach out for Mark. Before, Mark haunted his dreams. Now, Mark only haunts the small pixels of the game. Can you cover my shift tonight? Shalonda asked, rolling her chair over to Dee's small cubicle. I think I got me a date with Ethan. You think? Dee asked, glancing over his shoulder at her as he closed the browser tabs. Ethan the manager? No, Ethan Hawke. Gross. Ethan Hawke or Ethan the manager? Dee shrugged. Both? Whatever, you hatin', she said, squeezing in beside him at his desk. Will you cover me or not? I can't. Why? It's not like you got a date to rush off to. Do I need to have a date to stop you from going on yours? Shalonda sucked her teeth. The phones around them continued to ring as their coworkers pretended to be too busy to answer them in their fabric and metal forest. Can't you just ask him to let you out early? If it's a date, he'll let you go. She smiled. Well, that's the thing. It's only going to be a date if I get off in time to make it one. You feel me? She wiggled her eyebrows at him. Dee grimaced. You're a pal, she said, slapping his back hard. I didn't say yes, but you're going to. You have to. She began pouting. Please, let me go out and get some for both of us. Dee's sour expression ripened. But with Ethan? Shalonda was right. Dee eventually said yes, agreeing to another few hours strapped to his desk, pretending to take phone calls about people's wireless service. Yeah, right. Shalonda worked the graveyard shift with only a handful of other people who either worked so hard the world vanished around them or they disappeared into the world, so they wouldn't have to deal with the constant ringing of the call center. Dee's special vanishing spot was located in the old bathroom on the top floor. It shared a floor with only 2 other offices, both for nondescript companies that employed frat boy type wannabes and their girlfriends. When Dee first started working there, he spread a rumor for fun that the top floor bathroom was haunted. It got around, and the building manager had a new bathroom installed on their floor, 3 stories below. That left the top floor bathroom vacant because when there are new plush toilets, no one wants to use the old haunted ones. Plus, it had a lock on the main door. With his jacket and backpack for comfort beneath him, Dee settled up against the bathroom couch and powered on his laptop. Marvel's Madness pinged with unread messages. Continue game? Dee clicked in and began the startup menu, which ran quicker than last time. When he hopped back into the game, everything was just as he had left it, except for Mark. Mark in real life was meticulous about his appearance, showered and brushed his teeth every day, worked out and stretched twice a day. He was a bronze Adonis, all afro and dimples. Mark in the game was a pixelized shell of himself. You're mad at me, Mark said from his post at the entryway to the graveyard. 32-bit gray gravestones blended in with the forest behind him. Have you been here this whole time? Dee typed into the chat box. I can't go anywhere else. I'm stuck in this graveyard until we complete the mission. What mission? The mission of getting me out of this game. In the darkened bathroom, Dee typed, you're mad at me. You left me here to rot. You're still leaving me here to rot. I'm more than mad. I'm cursed. Cursed with you and cursed with this game. So then you don't want my help. Mark scoffed. Now you're going to help after making me walk these dark woods for weeks, waiting for you to come back to save me? I was only gone for a few days, Dee types, lying through his fingers. 1 week at the most. Weeks is being dramatic. Mark's beady eyes shook on his flattened face. It's been weeks. Sorry. Yeah, well, are you going to help me out or not? Are you sure you can even get out of there? Mark sighed. The whole point of the game, if you even bother to read the description, is to free the souls that have been trapped in this place. The asylum on the hill behind him lit up on cue, struck by a silent lightning bolt. Why did you decide to play this game anyway? Because I thought it'd be a fun play with you. Is it? You're not going to help me get out of here, are you? In the graveyard of Mark's doom, Dee's character stood swinging his muscular arms while he typed. I haven't decided yet. Mark spun, facing the camera and Dee on the bathroom couch. Will you at least help me get out of this graveyard and into a new level? Sure. What do we have to do? Mark led Dee's character around the trees and through the stilted shadows of the forest. A chainsaw ghoul appeared, the same one that had claimed Mark's life. I got this, Mark said, stepping in front of Dee's character. Hey, Henry, it's cool. We made up, at least for now. The chainsaw ghoul stopped its mad gurgle and killed the grinding action on his saw. You sure? Henry, the chainsaw ghoul asked. Yeah, he's going to help me get out of the graveyard. Henry's ghoulish face stared at the screen, pixelated gore hanging from his mouth. Dee waved, then stopped, shaking his head. I'm one of the good guys, he typed. You're a shit guy. Henry didn't start the chainsaw up again, but raised it towards Dee's character. And you should know, I can get you trapped in here the same as him. Grumbling, Henry began to slouch back into the shadows until he disappeared. Come on, Mark said. The next checkpoint is up this way. He pointed toward a moonlit path. Dee followed Mark deeper into the forest, collecting snacks and ammo for guns that were sure to come up later in the game. Rounding a corner triggered a cutscene. Mark's character was thrown into the heat of the action. A group of ghosts, including Mark, gathered up in a clearing where the moon's rays made them appear silver and see-through. He must be stopped, one of the ghostly figures in a nightgown moaned. He must be killed, a nurse hissed. Mark, what's going on? Dee typed. Mark stood in the clearing with the others, a stern look on his face. Can't control it. Don't go off script, the nurse barked. Mark's eyes jiggled. He deserves to die, he said sarcastically. For someone who's looking to get out, the nightgown ghost said, you're not playing along well. Dee typed into the chat box, what does it matter? Mark, let's move this along. You'll be allowed to continue, the nurse said to Dee, once the X appears on your screen. Until then, you'll wait. The nurse turned her back to the camera and pointed toward a sigil on a tree. That's where the key to the hospital is, Mark said, stepping away from the circle of ghosts and approaching the carving in the tree. The ghosts all vanished once Mark got closer. He attempted to punch through the wood, but it did not give. You mind helping? Dee moved his character toward the marker and struck when it prompted him to. A golden key fell out. Mark collected it. Are you able to move on now? Dee asked. Are you? Mark spat back. Rolling his eyes at the screen, Dee responded, if that's it, I'll see you when I see you. Dee, you can't just leave me in here. You'll be fine. You can't die again. You don't know that. I do. I read into your situation earlier at work. Your life, in a way, is on pause until you get out of the game. You're telling me my body's back at my office, just lying there? No. Well, that's good. They sent you, your body, to the hospital. They think you're in a coma. Mark began pacing. All right, that's it. You can't just keep letting this go. My body's in a coma, and me, I'm stuck in this game. You can either help me or find someone willing to. I'll help, just not yet. TTYL. Screw that. Mark took out a baseball bat and began swinging at Dee's character. Fending him off, Dee selected his pipe from the inventory and reared up for an attack, but Mark wasn't alone. His ghostly friends reappeared, overpowering Dee's character. A thread, like a drug-induced sleep, began pulling at his consciousness. As blackness took Dee over in the real world, Mark and his gang of ghosts brought Dee to his death in the dark digital forest. And that's Bang Bang.
Thank you. Thank you so much for reading that. I love that. And I love knowing that you write poetry as well, because there's just this line in there that's 32-bit gray gravestones. It like rolls so perfectly. I'm gonna I have some questions from our other coordinator who can't be here with us today, Jonah, but I kind of want to sneak in a question. I love the idea of like being sucked into a video game and kind of watching like the language of games mix with like the language of the literary, like rounding the corner to a cutscene. It's genius. What kind of games inspired the Marvel's Madness? That's the title of the game, yeah. But was there any specific game or games that inspired that setting?
Yeah. My partner and I actually play a lot of video games together. And before we became partners, we were friends for a while, and we would also play video games together. And one of them was this like 90s horror survival game that was very much like this, except it was like set at a college. And I think it was called, it could have been one of the Amnesia games, but I forget the actual like name of it. But it was that game, and we played some other games that were all based around just like trying to survive and explore in this horror world. So yeah, it was kind of just based on generic 90s horror survival games that I play a little bit too much and that I used to play a lot.
Awesome. I love that. Was Play Company a planned collection, or did you come about it serendipitously?
It was a bit of both. I knew I wanted to release a short story collection this year, but I had a few different ones in mind. And this one was the easiest one or the quickest one that I knew I could put together. The other ones, the stories that were involved in them would like had way too much work to go on with them. So yeah, it was kind of a mixture.
Nice. Um, so the titular story has elements of humor in it. Can you speak to the role of humor in your writing as well as the speculative fiction genre?
Yeah, it, it kind of, specifically in my writing, humor comes up naturally, just because I'm a humorous and like dry and sarcastic, funny type of person. So it just kind of comes in really easily. And I think when it comes to speculative fiction in general, I think it's just another tool that writers use to kind of add a little bit of spice and flavor to their writing, so that it's not just like one tone or one atmosphere or one mood, but there's that unexpected little chuckle, there's that unexpected little like joke here or there that kind of just, yeah, adds a bit of depth to this story.
Thank you. What subgenres of speculative fiction do you find yourself writing most, and which ones are you like the most eager to write?
I think I usually do, and I have to look down for this because I can't think of all of them off the top of my head because I get excited as soon as I think about one. So I write sci-fi, horror, anything dark, fantasy, science fantasy, and a little bit of Afro horror. And I also do some cyberpunk and some gothic stuff. But the ones that I'm really interested in and want to explore later in my career, once I make the time to like study them more, is jazz punk, which is awesome. It's like steampunk, but set in the 1920s during the jazz era. And so like incorporating those types of themes in it. If you're unfamiliar with it, check out Pimp My Airship. It's a really awesome book by Maurice Brodus that like I think is a great example of jazz punk. I would also like to do some slipstream stuff, some urban fantasy, some paranormal romance and or erotica, because I think that could be really fun to explore. Yeah.
That's amazing. Jazz punk sounds, I hadn't heard of that before, but I love the idea that it's taking place in that jazz era. That's amazing. Thank you for introducing me to that. Um, so what when writing speculative fiction, what do you think the pull to the like the slight non-reality of speculative fiction? And I feel like there's kind of a range of like this is kind of abnormal and technically speculative fiction, and then this unreality that we're dealing with, especially when in horror, like we know that this is not, normal fiction, that there's something being speculated on, and just what if this was the set condition of the world. And yeah, I want to know why content in that, based in that kind of unreality that you get to develop and work on.
Yeah, I think for me and a lot of other speculative fiction writers, but I can't speak for other people. I think it's all down to like, it's just the same as realistic fiction. It's just we work a little bit heavier on our themes and on our metaphors, because a lot of the greatest speculative fiction that you come across, all of those speculative elements, all of the fantasy, the science fiction, it's all greatly wrapped up and tied into the theme. So I think the pull to it is just wanting to work directly with, like, let's say, like in my last story, using the set of getting sucked into a video game, that's just playing off of the theme of getting out of a relationship you didn't want to be in, but staying friends with someone and feeling as though you're being sucked back into the game of the relationship. So yeah, I just think it's about that, playing with that metaphor and that theme and pulling it kind of out of the like fantasy realm that I feel like a lot of fiction does, even though, it's fiction. But yeah, their themes, their metaphors, their symbols, they're not as hard and defined as in speculative fiction, where your murderer or your slasher or your monster is usually the embodiment of some specific symbol or key or something like that. Yeah, I just think it's a way of just tricking the reader into feeling and think about something that they might be resistant to think about or feel. Yeah.
I love that. And I don't think I've actually heard it broken down for me like that before. And I actually, could you speak a little bit more to that, to the idea of tricking the reader into feeling something that they might not want to feel? Because I think that's in life, we kind of get to micromanage that a little bit more with like what is in our surrounding environment. And then when we enter story, we become vulnerable to what the author wants us to feel when they're crafting crafting us towards a certain direction, like letting the video game be the metaphor for that relationship that has a pull on you and at one point was fun because you enjoyed it, kind of like a video game, but it's beginning to take over. So can you speak more to and maybe let's talk about Bang Bang specifically. Did you know, was it the idea for the game first and kind of like that setting and seeing these two people in it, or was it an idea of like I want to write a relationship that came first?
What came first was I do this thing sometimes where I don't know why I do it, but I just get really into some like really negative thought. And I like will sometimes get myself and like make myself cry. And like one time my partner and I were playing video games and I was like, what if we broke up? And I was like, are we gonna still play video games? Like that's always been a part of us. And like we're totally fine and we love playing video games. But I was just really getting myself. And sometimes when I get myself, it turns into a story. And I was like, oh, I should like take those like weird emotions that I'm feeling and put it into this story and push it a little bit further. And as I developed it, they kind of like the symbol of the video game and the like emotions just kind of kept threading together. And it just seemed like to me, it's like a very strong metaphor. It's a very like not overhanded metaphor, but it's like one of those like, yeah, it's a relationship is sort of like a game and then you get sucked into a game. So yeah, it's like wanting to make the reader feel those gross emotions of like being sucked into a game, of like being in a situation that you don't want to be in, but like you're still in because you're like, oh, but we're friends and it's cool and it's fun. But it's like, but no, I would really rather leave this. And trying to tell that story without the video game metaphor and just setting it around these two characters and their terrible communication styles and their lack of respect for each other. I don't think it would have been as exciting of a story as if I use that like trickery of like, all right, let's like make it sort of fun where they get sucked into a video game and it's wacky. But like I have heard some readers say that like while there is that feeling, there's like this weird under feeling of grossness that they can't put their fingers on. And that's the feeling that I'm tricking them into feeling throughout the story through the different metaphors and symbols and lines.
Thank you for that, and that's brilliant. And I'm glad that you already know that there's like the readers are getting that feeling, because I felt it, because there's this, especially when someone is asking, hey, I want to tap out, I want to get out of this situation, someone's saying like, no, let's barrel on ahead. And in the context of a video game, it has a the conversation is almost more approachable, but then you get a view into what the rest of their dynamic is like. And it works well with the mix of humor as well, because it's kind of like I'm laughing, but I'm uncomfortable. It's that uncomfortable laughter that you're so good at putting on the page and making us shiver a little bit as we're listening. And I really love listening to you speak about how you craft your text and like work with the reader. And I want to know, like, when do you start thinking about the reader when you're writing? Do you kind of have a first draft that this is all you, this is the download you have received and your creativity on the page, and then as you edit, you go, you start thinking about the reader, or is it something that you're really aware of like, I want this to do this, and that is how this story is coming about with a like intent plan?
I'm a very intentional person and writer. So like the reader is in my mind once I start writing, because that helps me figure out how I'm going to tell the story and how I'm going to put the words on the page. I don't let it distract me too much. Like, I don't think like, oh, are they going to like this? Are they going to get this? It's more of like, what words will make a reader feel like this, or what words or sentences or metaphors or whatever will elicit the type of feelings and emotions and thoughts that I want, and how can I do it in a way where they're not realizing I'm doing it. So I think more about that and about the reader's state of mind. Yes, a little bit of like random reader psychology of just like, oh, what are cool symbols that are going to like really mess with them without them realizing they're messing with them. Yeah, the reader is like a really strong part of my writing process, but not of my story idea process. That just comes out of wherever that comes from. And then once I actually do the writing, then the reader is like my buddy right there with me.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I love that. Let's do a soft shift toward To Be Haunted, and maybe I actually want to ask the same question, like how do you work with the reader and craft, but in poetry? Is it a different process with poetry? Is it yeah, your relationship, same question, but with poetry, is it different than writing speculative fiction, the relationship with the reader specifically?
Oh yeah, absolutely. In poetry, the reader's still there, but like a backseat driver versus a passenger seat driver. Like they might be saying stuff, but like I don't care. Like I just don't. And I only really think about what like they could possibly say, or about like whether or not certain metaphors or sounds are gonna like ring right to the reader, because that's more of what I think about when it comes to the poetry, is more about like, because a lot of the metaphors, the weird lines, like they're so personal and they're more closer to like how I see things and how I think about things and experience them. They're just fun on the page for readers to read. So yeah, they're just not there. I just like, I love them. They're so great. Readers are awesome. Like everyone here right now is a reader / listener, and y'all are great. I love you. But like when I'm writing, I don't care about you.
I love that. I love that that's the relationship you have with your work. It's so enlightening and inspiring. Let us do that shift to Be Haunted. Onaid, I would love to ask for you to read from your poetry collection. And I saw that there's some people who came in late. Hello, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. What I am adding into the chat again is our event page for Orca. If you scroll to the bottom, you can purchase Anya's work down there. And I'm also going to add her website once more. Again, thank you, latecomers, for being here. You were just in time for the poetry. And Anya, I will hand the floor to you.
All right, I am going to read 3 poems from my collection. The first poem is going to be The Place I Have Left. And okay. The place I have left. My mother's are the only claws I'll ever allow to tear through my hair. She's the one who understands my tender head, the cavities that fall in at the lightest touch, leaving me one of those gasping ghosts who clings to hereafter in hopes. She won't remember what started me crying, but stroke my head and sing till we're yelling with the barking dogs. My father is the only beast I know who can hunt me down in the harshness of the moon and put me out with a smile that stretches long and laboring, all charm and violence, all pity and regret. When the wind casts smoke in my direction, I choke on blood that came gurgling from a place past the forest, overgrown and through a plate of smudged glass. I don't remember what you said, but it felt like a laugh after a hurt like an echo. I've heard tell of my brother growing arms the size of tanks. It seems so odd to me, having been raised with a fearful neglect of all things that go boom. But better his monster than mine. He was always the one who kept his hunting close to home. I was too stubborn, my snout against the ground, or worse, pointed toward the coming sun. I'm thousands of miles away, so this information is secondhand, a shaky found video watched over a bad connection. Arguments end in lies and dead batteries, It's not the same. Our horns have been dulled, our curses forgotten, and the pain is just a fragment of glass in my memory that doesn't feel like my memory, but someone else's twisted imagination or terror-fraught dream that plays in the light of a fire dying down to ash, to simmer. That's the end of that poem. I feel the need to say that because poetry is hard to know when it actually ends. So that's the end of that one. And my next poem is going to be The Monster That Eats Me. The monster that eats me. Your eyes feast on my body, gnawing away at my skin until my bones are exposed and you can make out the organs beneath. My blood is shy under your gaze, but my heart jumps as you decide what part of me to eat next. Take my lungs so that the air can no longer float away from me, like so much salt spilling out of a well-measured spoon. They are soft and tender, chewy and stringy, with tiny speckles that cling to the inner walls of your lovely mouth, sharp and inviting. When my air is gone, I beg that any trace of my own lips, tongue, and teeth be ground off my face and devoured. Consume those taunting features. They have only been a burden to me in my peaceful state of mind. They puckered when I always needed them to frown or scream. To them into oblivion. They are my gifts to you. All I want in return is for you to end me. Now I am beginning to feel wonderful. Soon you will dine on all of me and find that I was never right, not quite spoiled, not quite ripe. The crisp on my skin too hard and snapped when it should have broken. You'll find all of my desperate attempts at distancing myself from myself to be tasty, texturized morsels of what bits held me together the worst. Fat and blood steam around us, and I feel perfect in the way you look at me. And that's the end of that poem. All right. And then the final poem is Lack of Spirit. Lack of spirit. Sometimes I feel terror in my bones and I want to be alone. In this tomb I have known, my thoughts rest with Dorothy in some hell called Oz. Sadness takes me through the doors of time and the countless smiling faces of strangers welcome me. When I close my eyes, I find no escape. I cast my heart out from its home. I can no longer take it constantly reminding me of what is at stake. Imagine you hear ticking inside of your empty body while you're sleeping, while you're eating, while you're doing all you can. Now say there's also an itch deep inside of you, like a flea biting your soul. Imagine itching an imaginary itch. Scratch until you bleed, developing scars from an itch that doesn't exist. I'm a house that won't settle, the creaky crack you hear at night. I am a perfect room with no windows or smokes or spirits. And that's the end of the poetry.
Yes, thank you so much for those three. I so appreciate it. And I really love Lack of Spirit. I love all your work, but I'm just excited to talk about these three. And we'll vaguely go in order, and then I'm sure I'll get excited and want to ask you other questions, so it might get a little jumbly. But the place I have left, and I feel like I'm correct in this, that's the one where the form kind of takes like this carving each stanza, right? And I wish I could show you guys, but I'm going to try to describe it as best I can. It looks like almost like the text was supposed to be a rectangle and then it was cleaved right through. So you have longer lines on top as it comes down. And I really love that, especially since you're kind of discussing like this family of animals, and the body is very primal in how these characters in this poem are relating to each other. And I was wondering, for that poem specifically, was it the idea of the form first, or was it the text that then informed the shape that the poem took?
It was the text that informed the shape. Because before it was in a really boring shape that didn't do anything for it. And it was just kind of like line and line and line and stanza and line. It was just pretty basic. And I didn't like the way that it was. And I wanted to create more of a fleeting feeling, or like a fleeing feeling. So the lines, yeah, they start off like really long, and then like as it goes down, it becomes just like two words, maybe like I think the very last word in each stanza is just a word. It's not like a line or anything like that. And it was me trying to play with a metaphor of kind of leaving home and being from home, and like how your life is like all about that home. And then like as you leave, it's kind of like more and more fleeting, and like those moments become more kind of darker until like the dark moments are all there's left almost, or not the dark moments, but those really strong moments are all that's left. And yeah, I like the idea of like kind of like cutting everything down as I was writing. That played with like some other metaphors. But yeah, it was text informed the form.
Thank you so much. Sticking with the staying with the place I have left, I'm really kind of fascinated by this idea of like kind of again the family of animals, and kind of how initially on my first read through I was thinking like thwarted by technology, but as I was listening to, I was thinking of distance, and at first I was thinking like the technology carries across the distance like via like the lines of the internet, right? And then towards the end you start speaking to memory and how memory ages. And through just listening to just now, I started perceiving that distance as not only like literal, like bodies physically separate from each other, but also the distance of time, and just the distance time creates from event to next event, however long we make that unit. And I'm wondering if you can speak to that a little bit, and just the space that's created between this family, especially towards the last end of the stanza. And maybe I want to ask, did you know that space was there when you first started writing each character, or did you come to discover that last stanza as the last stanza, as in you wrote it last?
I knew that that distance and that space was there. I think the line specifically about memory and how it doesn't feel like my own, and like a nightmare and stuff like that, that came much later than like the actual, like the first draft of that poem. Because that took me a while to figure out what I was trying to say. I don't even remember what was there originally. But yeah, it like took a while of just like exploring different, like my own relationship with my parents and my family and growing up, and just like the memories of youth that some people have. And like I think like what finally like got me was like there was like a lot of talk going around, and I think it was like sparked by a meme, but of how you as a child will remember things that are like really dark and really horrible, but if you bring it up to your parents or like an older person, they won't remember it the same way. Like it might even be a funny memory to them, or like it might be like not even actual memory. And then in the introduction to the poetry collection, I kind of get into that a little bit about kind of like why some of the imagery was animals and stuff like that. And it's like, I grew up on like a pig farm, and there was like a lot of bones we used to dig up, but like, was that ever really real? Like I would ask my dad about it, but like, I don't think he remembers. But yeah, so like that, it just took a little bit of like figuring out what I was trying to say and how best to say it. Yeah.
Thank you. That's lovely. And I do recall in your introduction I remember the attachment to earth, and yeah, the idea that you were digging up bones, and who's to say if it was a monster bone or just something an animal had left, which is so fascinating. And I'm now kind of connecting like this idea of like that childhood wondered with the horror, because you write horror in this way that it is like does like this physical thing to your body, right? Like when, well, at least when I experience it, when the reader reads it, but it's not the repellent almost. It's like the horror that draws you closer. And I think there's something in that childhood wonder for horror, maybe. It's, again, your work is lovely to read. Thank you so much for sharing it with us. Moving over to The Monster That Eats Me, there is a line in there that I just adore, and it's "My blood is shy," and it preludes right before "And my heart jumps." And it really made me think, like, we have this language around certain parts of the body acting as if they're personified, like a heart jumping. We all know that means heart beating fast. But "My blood is shy" is so gorgeously unique. And I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to like the personification of parts of the body, and parts of the body having a separate and like intelligence or awareness or consciousness that operates as it is also still part of a whole.
Yeah, I think I can. I might have you repeat the question, but I think I can answer it. And I think where a lot of that comes from is, yeah, I always like when I'm writing and I am trying to describe particular physical emotions, because I do like reminding the reader that they have a body and I have a body too, and all of our bodies are kind of gross and they do weird things, and let's talk about those gross weird things, but like let's not talk about them. We'll just talk about them a little bit. And so lines like "My blood is shy," and a lot of the lines in that poem, because that poem is about like, yeah, having to expose yourself and be open and like just being in front of people, and how gross it is and how people kind of can pick you apart and it can feel like you're being eaten and destroyed, for some people, not everyone. And I feel like I get really into my body during those moments a little bit too much. And so like, yeah, I can feel weird body things that like I don't normally feel. I wouldn't say that I can feel my blood getting shy, but it's like those weird, like, oh my God, I could feel this like crazy feeling in my stomach that I don't want to be feeling when I'm nervous. And it's just trying to like draw on that, but picking really odd and unique phrases to describe it instead of saying something else that like wouldn't be as like good or perfect as like "My blood is shy," which like, yeah, it means a lot of different things, but like that line and a couple other lines, they just kind of perfectly describe what it feels like sometimes to be around people.
Thank you. Thank you. That absolutely answered my question. And yeah, I just adore that. And the like being around people and also having a body while also having to acknowledge that they have a body, it becomes like a whole thing. um, and yeah, something that maybe I want to admit to, because like you kind of mentioned like that tearing apart is like it's very vulnerable or gross or not to all people. I was gonna say there's almost something sensual about like this very like grotesque action of being pulled apart. And I am curious, and maybe this goes back to like the embodiment, and since this is really about like being like devoured by the monster that eats, right? What was the what was the emotion that was like churning through you as you were like describing this, again, very like grotesque but really beautiful at the end of the day? It's intense language because it reminds us of like the blood and the heart and the gore, but I can't get away from the word sensual or beautiful. Like there's something that's really working for me in there.
Yeah, no, those were the exact things that I wanted readers to feel when they read it and what I was going for. Because while I do get really nervous around people, I fucking love it. Like I love talking and I love hanging out and I love shooting the shit and just uh being, yeah, being around people and just like being a goofball and like it's very, my Leo nature comes out a lot. And so it's like, I have these two parts of me where it's like, oh, please leave me alone. I don't want to do this talking. I don't want to do this hanging out. But then like when it happens, I'm like, yes. And then I get really into it and it's really great. And it feeds certain parts of a monster, perchance, inside of me. And it just feeds that. And even though I hate it and it's gross, I'm still like, yeah, let's do it. Let's keep doing that gross stuff. Let's do this weird thing where I get really nervous and like sick to my stomach, but like, yeah, let's keep doing it. And so that was what I was trying to play with. But I didn't want it to be like happy and joyous, because that wasn't as close to the feelings that I get when I interact in like social situations. Like it's way closer to feelings of like platonic sensualness or like romantic sensualness, or just like beauty of being around other people and being able to fight through the grossness and like through the weird social sickness that like some people may feel, just to be with another person and to experience that and to share those moments. So it's like, yeah, it's sensual but scary to be around other people.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that so much. Moving on to lack of spirit, there's this juxtaposition that you do really early on that I love. There's a stanza that's really evoking like a graveyard imagery. The word graveyard is not used, but like bone and tomb. And then almost right after you jump to Oz, and it's kind of like this really it makes Oz tense. And the idea of Oz is like already like kind of tense to me. It's like so whimsical. I'm like a little unsure about it. But like the jump from like kind of like the romantic gothic, and romantic gothic is in the style of like the language of the 1800s, maybe, right? To that, mid 1900s, like what Wizard of Oz came out in the 50s or something, like kind of a jump from graveyard to fairyland almost. And I'm thinking about Bang Bang as well, and the video game setting in that. And you're kind of really this master of scenery. And I wanted to ask, when you're writing, and maybe this will be a little bit of a fiction and poetry question as well, if the answer is different, if it's the same, disregard. But is it something visual that comes up in you? Like, does it, especially when you're writing these vivid scenes, like, do you see something, or do you feel the text and write the text, or is it a little bit of both, or something entirely different?
It kind of changes. I think when it comes to like most things visually, I like have to do the like visualizing of closing my eyes and like setting the scene. For lack of spirit in particular, that was just I don't know, that was very natural. That all came out pretty much the way the poem is the way the poem was written. I don't think I changed anything. I might have done some like line break changes, but for the most part, that poem is just that poem, and it's always sort of been like that. But I think for me, the reason why that the Dorothy and Oz thing, or like pairing those two up, was that for me, they are the same. Like I didn't grow up on Dorothy or like the Wizard of Oz. Like I saw The Wiz when I was like 9, but I have never seen the original Wizard of Oz. Like I know the storyline and I know like everything that happens, but to me it's this like old, sad, archaic, gothic type of story. And sorry, I had an alarm going off. And so like for me, that was like a perfect description. I was like, oh my God, Oz is awful. Like that is a terrible place. Like, why doesn't anyone see this as a nightmare world? But for me it was, and I have had to explain that blind to a couple of people because they're like, but Oz is so fun. I was like, oh, it's not, it's really not. It's like a terrifying world if you don't see that. But yeah, so yeah, for that one, it was just pretty natural. Those are just my feelings and my thoughts, and they connected. For everything else, it's like an act of visualization or chasing down specific words and lines that will evoke not just the setting, but the emotion and what's going on in the story or the poem.
I love that. And I love that your mind looks at Oz and says, yeah, like that's scary thing over there. I love that your brain does that. And the next question, so like as we're not seeing the movie, it really exists in our like cultural like diaspora. Like it's here. It has bled into us just through references and growing up, I feel like, in a culture that loves the Wizard of Oz, or at least honors it, you know. And I was thinking this like this poem really is a journey. Like there's like a movement that you can go through, and I'm so fascinated that this one kind of just came through, like you said, like as it is on the pages as it came. So in that way, it's kind of like getting to witness like your journey of the writing process of when it just like flows through. And it ends on home, and you know, the Wizard of Oz has a whole thing about there's no place like home. um but there's a line towards the end, I'm a house that won't settle, and I really love that line because there's something so like unnerving about it. But the idea of the house settling, you know, when you hear the creaks in the wall, oh, don't worry about it, it's the house settling, like that's already unsettling. And then to have a house that won't settle is kind of just leaves like this unnerved, like, oh, something has been unfinished, even though it is a construct that we live in. So I'm wondering if you could speak to the themes of home briefly, and the home and like the physical structure of the house, and whether or not you thought about houses in tornadoes while you were writing this.
Oh, when it comes to home, I have so many thoughts. I love spaces and homes and the ways that they affect us as people. I read The Poetics of Space at a very young age, and it has totally shaped a lot of what I think about when it comes to symbols of home, and when it comes to like people, and like being able to kind of just like read people's spaces and them. And it's also just been, it's one of those themes that I write about, I think, and almost everything I do, like home will come out in some way because of how important I think it is, and how important I think the idea of it is. Because when I talk about home, I'm not always thinking about like, oh, the like structures that you live in. Like sometimes home is a metaphor in your mind. Sometimes like home isn't that structure. Like sometimes it's something totally different, but the idea and the symbol of home is still there, and still yeah, big and large, and like kind of hovering over most of us without us even realizing it. And I think specifically when I wrote this poem, Lack of Spirit, I forget how old I was, but it wasn't a recent poem, it was a bit ago. And the idea of home and a tornado were very much in my mind, because I think I was like early 20s or mid 20s. So like I was a tornado, and like home was so far away in my mind. Like I hadn't found a place that felt like home, or that felt like that settled down type of home existence. Like I had created one in my mind and was like in it, but like when you're a tornado and you're creating a home in your mind, that's also a tornado, and it's all just spinning and wild and crazy. And like, so Lack of Spirit was just me trying to, stupid alarms, me trying to write out what I was feeling like when it came to, yeah, that the depression that I was in at the time during my bad years, of just, yeah, feeling like a house that wouldn't settle, feeling like yeah, a house without windows or doors or spirits. Because like at the time where I wrote that, I do remember having that feeling like that was my body. Like that stanza is very much so me describing my body and how I felt about it, because that's all a home is a body and like homes embody so many things and vice versa. So yeah, home is a huge thing for me. I like with the books that I released some games, and I realized like while writing them that they both dealt with home in different ways. Like there was the Nightmare House was like about surviving a like haunted house and like making it through to the morning. And then Take Me Home was about being on a colony ship heading towards a home planet. And like very different, but both like home themes. So home is just like one of those big things for me that I love thinking about and talking about and writing about.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this conversation and just for being here with us and Orca today. And thank you everyone for coming to celebrate Aigner's work. And as we have about 4 minutes left, and before we head out, I want to ask two things. One, how can we further celebrate Halloween with your work? And I'm thinking of your game specifically, actually, so I'm happy you brought those up. And are you working on anything? And what can we look forward to? And I hope we get to have this conversation again in a year.
Yeah, you can find me at the links above in this section up here. Those are my social things. When it comes to celebrating Halloween with me, definitely check out my haunted house game, and I can drop the link in the comments. I'm actually doing a sale of it for the Halloween weekend on itch.io. So yeah, that'll be in the comments. It's a fun, pretty hard, kind of intense game where you have to play through to make it to the end. It's literary fiction, interactive. So you click and you make choices based on creepy experiences that you'll have throughout the game. So that's that. And I forgot what the other question was. What else am I working on? Working on a lot of things. One of the things that I am working on is I just moved into a senior fiction editor role with Strange Horizons. I was an associate editor, but I accepted a position to move up. So I'll be doing a lot of editing and slush reading still for that magazine. And I'm really excited about that, and to like get more involved with publishing new writers and working with writers. And I also I took notes so that I would remember what to say. I have some fiction stories that I'm editing up to submit out to magazines, and there's a couple that I'm working on right now with some editors. I just can't say where those are going to be at right now because that's how fun publishing works. I also have a few articles slated for release from the Writer's Digest and Wired and a few other places. But if people want to like know and like get heads up on that type of stuff, I do have a readers group where I share all the links to my work and like where people can find me and my new articles, and I'll drop that in the chat. Yeah, and I've got some courses which also you can find through my website. I'll be doing more courses and putting those up online so that people can learn from me. I think that is it. Oh, and I do have some magazines that I've edited that are coming out January, and that's from Fireside, and I can drop that link also in the chat. So those will be out in a couple of months, and I'm really excited for those. They will be very dark, very dark. Super warning on those. They will be really, really dark, but great. Very emotional, but like super dark. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing all of that with us. And just thank you for the wonderful conversation today. Thank you so much for being with Orca, and thanks everyone for coming.
Yeah, thank y'all so much. This was awesome. This was great. I survived. I'm really glad that everyone was here, and yeah, no one did not survive through it.